Hey everyone, what's up? It's TJ here, another episode of Gig Life Vlog. So this weekend I was a little bit of an up and down one for me. On Friday I had a solo gig at the Frenchville, and it was a last minute sort of thing because I was supposed to be booked in Gladstone, but just because of a mix-up down there, I ended up getting moved to Rockhampton and playing the Frenchville instead, which is nice. It's always a very laid-back gig at the Frenchville. It's, nice to play for what is absolutely a different sort of crowd than what I would usually play for at most other venues. On Saturday night, I played a gig down at the Strand Hotel in Yeppoon, which is not a venue that I play at very frequently, and the reason I played down there was because I was filling in with my buddy Shane. We were filling in for another mate's band. So we had Pete, who's the drummer from that band, and Pete Mills, not Pete Daly, who I usually play with. Pete Mills, he's also the brother of Sean Mills, who I do my podcast, the Australian podcast, which check that one out. If you like that dry political and world events commentary, which I know you all do, check that one out. It's a fantastic little hour each week. But I'm going to drop some footage from the Strand gig, and we're going to put it in right about here.
Maybe below the cockles, maybe in the subcockle area, maybe in the liver, maybe in the kidneys, maybe even in the colon. We don't know. Well, I'm just a regular Joe with a regular job. I'm your average white suburbanite slob. I like football and porno and books about war.
So yeah, fair warning. Probably should have given you a heads up. It was going to be a little bit loud, but sorry. Better ask forgiveness and all that. One thing you're going to notice there is that Shano was on the guitar, meaning that I played bass. And for those of you who don't know me that well, I used to play bass professionally for about a bit over a decade and a half, and it was my first gig on the bass in about 2 years, so it was a lot of fun. Getting a chance to do something I haven't done in a while, and work with people I don't usually work with too often. So, it was a lot of top fun. The week, got to be a little bit honest here, the week wasn't a great week for me. I mentioned it was an up and down sort of weekend, and, the gigs were definitely a big up. But the downside is I was, in June I had a month-long booking at a venue, and where I was going to be going out of town, going to that venue and living there for a month, playing 5 to 6 nights a week. And unfortunately, I got an email during the week saying that they were cancelling the first 3 weeks because they couldn't afford to put live music on because they didn't have the bookings at this particular venue. And when you're doing when you do the resort, yep, that's my dryer. That's my dryer going off right there, if you can hear that little beep. But, unfortunately, you get this kind of upside-downside thing when you do the resort work. Which, I'd love to do more of the resort work because, don't get me wrong, the pay's great. The challenge is of keeping it different and keeping it interesting when you've got to play 5-6 nights a week in the same venue is always interesting from a musician's perspective, to try and work around that particular challenge. It's not easy. But unfortunately, the big downside is if you do get cancelled, it's usually at short notice and there's nothing you can do about it. So, some of you might already know who the venue is. And if you don't know, I'm not going to be unprofessional enough to name and shame them here, but because it's not their fault. This came down from their managing company overseas, and it's just an unfortunate turn of events, you know, that they didn't have the bookings necessary to have me play. And, you know, I don't hold it against the venue, and I especially don't hold it against the entertainment manager out there. She's one of the most lovely people, and she has had my back for quite a while. So I'm just hoping that next, you know, when I'm out there, because I've still got one of the 4 weeks out there, and I'm just hoping that when we discuss, you know, what's going to happen in future, that they'll be amenable to having a written contract which will have a cancellation fee in it. Because that's something that happens with a lot of venues now, that if you cancel a gig within a month, you're expected to pay half the fee up front. But unfortunately, unless you've got that in writing as part of your contract, you can't enforce it. And a lot of venues, you know, there are still some venues, I won't say a lot, because most venues understand it and do the right thing. But sometimes, you know, you get the whole multinational corporations who don't do this in other countries, and they don't understand why we do this in Australia. So they they don't want to sign those contracts, and they, you know, if you offer a contract like with a clause like that in, they'll tell you that you know, you can either do it their way or not at all. But anyway, I'm gonna have a chat to the to the entertainment manager out there about next year, because I'd still like to keep working there. You know, it's one of my favourite venues in the world. And this week for your album recommendation, I will put it out there that my album recommendation is going to be Plastic Beach by Gorillaz. Now, in saying that, this is not my favourite Gorillaz record, and to be honest, it's not even, I wouldn't even say that it's their best work. However, it's an interesting album. It's very out there. It's got a lot of stuff that's all over the shop. A lot of influences that you wouldn't, and a lot of sounds that you wouldn't usually see in most records. But again, that's a big part of who the Gorillaz are and what they do, is they bring a lot of hipster ideas and turn them mainstream. And they always have, ever since their first record. The reason I'm going to recommend Plastic Beach is purely because it has my two favourite Gorillaz songs on it. And that's Up on Melancholy Hill, which is just this gorgeous little 80s synth track. And also Stylo, which if you haven't heard Stylo, you're absolutely crazy. Stylo's the one, it's got Mos Def dropping a few rhymes on it. And Mos Def is just one of those insanely underrated rappers out there. He changed his name to Yusef something now. He was also in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the film. He played Ford Prefect, and he just nailed it. You know, that being one of my favourite series of books of all time. And that song's also got Bobby Womack guest starring. And if you know me, you know that I love my crazy 70s soul vocals. You know, he's almost got this sort of preacher-esque cadence to the way that he sings in it, like he's in a pulpit lecturing the world on its evils, and it's a hell of a song. If you haven't picked up this record, I recommend go into it with a very open mind. It's different. It's not something that you really are going to see out of most other mainstream bands at the moment. But anyway, I'm going to sign off. As always, I've been TJ for the weekend. And if you've got questions, if you've got anything like that, throw them in the comments, on the Facebook, on the YouTube, on the Twitter. I'll do my best to answer them. And I guess I'll see you guys next week. Cheers.